All right, good afternoon, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started. My name's Amy Miller. I'm the watershed specialist for the Allegheny County Conservation District. I'm here with my coworker, John, who's going to be monitoring the chat box for today's session. That's where we'll be answering questions at the end of the presentation. So just type your questions in the chat box at the bottom center of your screen, and John will make sure that they get asked at the end. So with that, we'll get started with the presentation. So with Earth Day today and Arbor Day just around the corner on Friday, our topic for today's webinar is trees. Trees provide many benefits, so it's important that they receive the best possible start by planting them correctly. Mistakes made in the planting process can cause your tree problems for years to come. So today we're going to talk about trees, some planting considerations when selecting a tree, and how to plant and care for trees properly. As I said, trees provide many benefits. There are a number of studies on the socioeconomic, health, and psychological benefits of trees, but my background is in biology, so I'm going to focus on a few environmental benefits to get started. Trees provide oxygen, and that's our main survival tool. So trees also absorb pollution and air, which reduces smog and enhances your community's respiratory health. Climate change. Burning fossil fuels puts heat trapping carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, changing our climate. Planting trees can slow down this process. Trees absorb carbon dioxide, reducing the overall concentration of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. Annually, an acre of trees can absorb the amount of carbon dioxide equal to driving your car 26,000 miles. Energy conservation. The shade and windbreaking qualities of trees provide benefits everyone from individuals taking shelter on a hot day to entire cities. Trees are our natural air conditioner. A household with shade trees could spend 12% less on cooling costs in the summer, and trees can cool a city by up to 10 degrees by breaking up urban heat islands and releasing water. Water filtration and retention. Trees capture and slow runoff, and their roots filter water and recharge groundwater. Stormwater can be full of phosphorus, pollutants, and nitrogen. So without trees, stormwater flows into streams and rivers without being filtered. Trees reduce stormwater runoff, which reduces flooding and prevents soil erosion on hillsides and stream slopes. Trees slow runoff and hold soil in place. Trees also provide wildlife habitat for numerous birds, insects, animal species. They provide food sources, nesting materials, and shelter for animals. So why are you planting a tree? We just talked about the overall benefits of trees, but what's your personal reason for planting a tree? Just identifying your reasons can help you choose the right tree species. For example, are you planting for shade in your backyard? You'll probably want to consider species like oaks or tulip poplars or maples. These species tend to grow a little faster, have a large canopy, and can provide the perfect spot in your backyard. Maybe viewing wildlife or birds in your backyard is important. You'll want to plant a tree that provides habitat or food resources. Consider trees such as beech, oaks, cottonwoods, winterberries. These trees provide nuts and berries for food, nesting materials, and shelter for many birds, squirrels, and other wildlife. Perhaps you just want a pretty tree like this redbud. It has purplish pink flowers in the spring and green heart-shaped leaves in the summer. Or maybe you would like something more functional like a windbreak. Many conifer species such as these spruce trees, are great for windbreaks or visual screens if you don't want to see a road or sound barriers, if you don't want to see your neighbors or hear a road. Finally, edibles. Trees and shrubs produce fruits and berries such as apples, cherries, mulberries, elderberries. That list can continue on and on. Most species fulfill one or more functions, so whatever your reason, just make sure you pick something that fits your needs and is native to your area. So not only should your tree fit you, it also needs to fit your space. Make sure you know how tree how large you select can become. Some species like sycamore or oaks or tulip poplar can be 80 to 100 feet tall at maturity, so you need to make sure you have room for that. Other trees like redbuds, witch hazels, or winterberries will only be 10 to 30 feet tall at maturity. You should also think about canopy width. Trees don't only grow up, they grow out. This tree can only grow out on one side because it's planted way too close to this building. So a common error made by homeowners is picking a young tree that's going to become a large tree and planting it too close to their house or sidewalks. A tree like this one, although it's blocking the view from the window, isn't causing any problems right now. But in a few years, a tree gets larger and the roots will heave any concrete slab, be it your sidewalk or your house foundation. So you need to consider the root zone when planting a tree. Root zones can extend out from the trunk about 1.5 to 2.5 times the height of the tree. Another suggestion is 1 foot of radius for every inch of trunk diameter. For example, if you have a 30-inch trunk, then the required root zone would be 60 feet. You should also consider how much sun your new tree will receive in its new spot. Is it along a wood line where trees are already 40 to 60 feet tall, or on the shadier side of your house? If this is the case, then you want to make sure to plant a tree that will grow in part or full shade. Likewise, you'll want to consider how the tree will impact your existing landscape. At some point, the tree will become large enough to shade the area around it. So this may impact vegetation like flower beds, gardens, or other trees in your yard. So here's some common species with their shade tolerance levels. Most trees want sun. However, the species on the left will do well in shady areas. If you think about a forest, the trees that are found in the understory will tolerate shade, while those that are the tallest most likely will not. You also want to be mindful of overhead utility lines. When a tree under a utility line eventually reaches a mature height and the spread of the canopy competes with overhead lines, the utility company is going to come and trim the tree. Oftentimes it can look like the picture on the left in a V shape, or they'll take the top of the tree completely off, both of which is neither very appealing looking and is definitely not good for the tree. So keep in mind that any tree or shrub planted within 15 feet of a utility line should not reach over 10 feet in height at maturity to limit the competition with the utility line. Note that in zone 2 there, 15 to 50 feet away from the utility line, trees shouldn't reach above 40 feet in height at maturity. In addition to overhead utility lines, you should consider underground lines as well. Calling 811 before you dig. Many people have heard this before, but what you might not realize is that it applies to all digging, not just major excavations. Even if you're just digging a foot, you can prevent property damage and injury by calling 811 a few days ahead of time. The roots from trees can eventually impact underground lines as well, so it's important to know where these lines are so you don't create problems down the road. A broken gas or a sewer line can lead to serious consequences and expense, so versus calling 811 for free. Soils. Soils are a complex part of the living landscape. Every plant requires different soil conditions to do well, yet we often take for granted that plants will grow in any soil, but that's really just not the case. Soil has both physical and chemical properties that influence tree growth. A couple of soil properties that influence trees include texture, structure, and drainage. Soil texture refers to the ratio of sand, silt, and clay particles in the soil. Sandy soils will feel gritty, silty soils feel smooth like flour, and clayey soils will feel sticky. Soil texture rather is important because it influences other soil characteristics such as the structure, the water holding capacity, and the water, air, and nutrient availability for the tree or shrub. Soils rarely consist of one particle size, but are typically a mix of all three of those. Medium textured soils with an even mix of sand, silt, and clay are generally the most favorable for growing plants. Soil structure refers to the natural bonding of the soil particles into clumps of varying sizes. Soils with good structure have a lot of pore space and break up easy. This allows for adequate water infiltration into the soil, good drainage, and air movement, which promotes strong root development. Drainage is probably one of the most important factors. Soils that are poorly drained often have wet, saturated soils for several days after a wet period. Compaction promotes wet, saturated soils, and these soils don't have as much oxygen, which deprives the roots of the ability to take up water, actually, and ironically, the plant will die from a lack of water. So for more information on soils, this was a very rudimentary introduction, and how you can test your soils and improve your soils. We'll have a link at the end to the Penn State Extension Office. They provide soil testing. In addition, ACD is hosting a webinar tomorrow on Soils 101 for urban gardeners and residents at 5 p.m. and we can provide a link for you to register for that as well if you're interested. You can plant trees in either the spring or the fall, although fall is often considered the best time of year to plant trees. Generally, late August, September, and October are the best months, but it all depends on if it feels like fall. Sometimes those late August and September days can get pretty warm. You want to make sure that the hottest days of summer are past and the ground isn't frozen yet. So a good rule of thumb is to plant at least 4 to 6 weeks before either extreme conditions of winter or summer are expected to arrive in your area. So why fall? There's less chance of drought and sun scorch harming your newly planted tree. The cooler temperatures encourage new root growth, and this is compounded since trees are focusing on growing new roots in the fall anyway. So planting new trees then helps them develop more and stronger roots. Time of year can be species specific. For example, maple trees, sugar maple, red maple, etc. They should be planted in the fall. But birch, dogwood, willow, and magnolia trees need more time to establish before the cold weather hits, so they should be planted in the spring. You have to make sure to properly water them throughout the summer though. If you're considering pine trees or other evergreens, they can be planted in either fall or spring because they don't go dormant. You just want to make sure the weather isn't too hot. Fruit trees can be a little tricky. If winters are cold, you should plant fruit trees in early spring to avoid winter damage. But if your area has mild or warm winters, you can plant them in the fall. In Pennsylvania, you would probably want to plant them in the spring since we have fairly unpredictable winters, especially the last few years. There are three main ways nurseries sell their trees: bare root, containerized, and ball and burlap. Bare root, as the name implies, is sold with without soils around the roots. Containerized trees are grown in a pot with compost or other media like wood chips. They come in a variety of sizes from 2 to 25 gallons. The ones in the picture there are 2-gallon pots. Ball and burlap trees are trees that have been field grown from a seedling to a predetermined size, usually 4 feet and up. Each tree is then dug and placed in a wire basket lined with burlap to be sold to the consumer. There's no best approach to buying and establishing plants in your backyard. Each one of these options has advantages and disadvantages. Bare root is often the cheapest option and will perform well when planted correctly, but can often only be purchased at limited times when the plant is dormant and should be planted immediately after you purchase it. Containerized trees can be purchased at any time and with proper care can be stored a bit until you're ready to plant it. However, you have to pay attention to the roots when purchasing container trees, that they aren't circling around the container. We're going to talk more about circling roots in a few slides. Ball and burlap trees are often several years old. They're larger. They may require a little less maintenance. However, they are heavy, making them difficult to move around, and they're often the most expensive of the three options. So once you've selected the perfect tree and place for it, you're ready to plant. You'll need a pair of hand pruners and to trim the roots, a shovel, and either a hose or a bucket to water the tree. Each of the three types has a little different prep before you plant it. Bare root stock, the roots of your bare root stock should be soaked in water for 3 to 6 hours prior to planting. This will make sure the roots get much needed water right from the start. Container stock, you want to be careful removing the tree from the container. You want to be gentle. You may need to roll the pot back and forth to loosen the root ball and slide the pot near the edge of the hole. The bark of young trees is thin and easily damaged, so you may have to cut down the side if you have a bigger pot and can't pick it up. You want to avoid pulling that tree out of the container by its trunk. This can often damage the tree. You also want to carry the tree by the pot rather than the trunk or the branches. And finally, ball and burlap, you want to make sure to remove any wire or fasteners holding the burlap in place, as well as the burlap itself. These can impede the roots from growing in an outward direction. So we talked a little bit about roots already, but see the lower left is a picture of a container tree that's been in a container probably a little too long, and the roots have started circling the outside of the container. This can choke the tree because the roots are going to continue to grow in that circular pattern. So you'll want to use pruners or a sharp knife to cut those circling roots free so that they'll grow outward from the root ball. Trimming the roots at this point will not harm the tree. New roots will sprout from and spread out from those cut roots. So they should be loose and look like this picture on the right. The hole you dig should be wide and shallow. It should look more like a saucer than a bucket with gently sloping sides. It should also be 3 to 4 times wider than the root of the tree. This is so that that soil gets broken apart when you dig the hole, so that the roots will be allowed to grow outward without crowding or being hindered by any compacted soils. You also don't want to plant the tree too deep. This is the biggest mistake you can make when digging the hole. To know how deep you should plant the tree, you need to find the root collar, which is at the base of the tree where the trunk starts to flare out to meet the roots. If you find the root collar, you can use a yardstick to measure the distance straight down from the root collar to the bottom of the root ball. And that's the depth you should dig the hole to. The root collar should be at or slightly above the level of the surrounding soils. The roots themselves should be covered but not sticking out. Roots should be pointed downward and outward. Whichever direction you stick those roots in there, that's how it's going to grow. So you want to make sure, especially with bare rootstock, that they don't bend upward back towards the surface, because that's how they will grow, and this will cause future damage to the tree. So when you place the tree in the hole, you want to check to make sure that, again, that root collar is at the level of the surrounding surface, or 1 or 2 inches above the level, as over time the tree may settle. So you want to orient the tree so standing upright and it's facing the right way. So whichever way the best looking side should face, either the street or the window from which you'll be viewing the tree. And then you'll just start refilling the hole with the soil that you dug out of the hole. You don't want to add any soil amendments, fertilizers, or potting soil at this point. Especially fertilizers can harm the roots of young trees. So if you think your soils will need that, you need to prep that in advance, probably the year before, or at least the spring or fall before. So you want to break up any clumps or remove grass or other vegetation, so you have a nice loose soil that's not going to impede that root growth. Gently pack the soil back into the hole, firming it as you go with your hands and your feet once you get to the top, until the hole has been filled and the tree remains vertical. You want to make sure not to pile soil on top of that root ball and bury the root collar. If you have too much soil, spread it out around the hole in a circle. This will reduce competing vegetation in the future. Mulch, spread wood chips or shredded wood mulch about 2 to 4 inches deep in a wide circle around the trunk. Mulching should be spread out in a circle 3 feet in diameter around the trunk at a minimum. For larger trees, the mulch should spread out as far as the canopy extends if possible. That canopy line is called the drip line. The wider the mulch circle, the better, and you shouldn't pile mulch against the trunk of the tree. You'll want to pull mulch 3 to 4 inches away from the bark, like this tree is properly mulched. Mulches can improve soil structure and fertility, conserve moisture, moderate temperature, and prevent weeds. But as beneficial as mulch can be, you should avoid over mulching. Deep mulch may suppress weeds, but it can also cause major health problems that lead to tree decline and even kill your tree. So the most common way that people over mulch is with this mulch volcano. They pile it up around the base of the tree, and you've effectively buried that root collar. So once you get your tree planted, you want to make sure that you water it. The hose or bucket, it needs at least 10 gallons of water. This is about 30 seconds or a little longer if you're using a hose, or you can do 2 5-gallon buckets. It's also important to protect young trees from being chewed or eaten by wildlife, such as rabbits and deer. There's 3 main ways to do this, depending on the type of tree or shrub you're planting. Option 1 is a tree tube. Tree tubes protect upward growing trees, such as oaks or maples, that are often a great snack for deer to browse on. Tree tubes are also said to provide an optimal internal environment to promote strong, straight trunk growth. However, if you're planting the tree in your backyard, you may not want to look at a tree tube, so it's not the most attractive thing. So you may consider option 2, is a chicken wire or welded wire cage. Cages can be used for trees or shrubs, but you want to make sure that they're wide enough that they're going to provide enough room for the tree to grow without getting tangled in that cage. The benefit of cages is that they allow you to still see your tree or shrub while still getting that wildlife protection, but they can be difficult to weed around or manage your mulch around. The third option is a mesh collar. They're typically only used on larger tree trunks and protect against antler or equipment damage from mowing. Any of these options is a relatively inexpensive investment to protect your tree and are strongly encouraged. So tree care for the first 2 years of your tree, you want to make sure to water it every 7 to 10 days as needed through the growing season, especially during those summer months. While it's important to water trees, it's also important not to overwater trees. So the top 2 inches of the soil should be moist. If it's dry, you should water it. If not, you should just continue checking. You need to weed around your tree. With proper mulch, you should cut down on the number of weeds around your tree. However, weeds compete with the tree for resources and should be removed. This includes grass. You should maintain a weed-free zone about 2 to 3 feet around the tree or more for larger trees. And finally, you want to maintain that tree protection. So you want to remove any leaf litter buildup, especially in the fall, around the tube or cage, or even in the tube. Make sure the tree or shrub is not hindered in any way by the caging or the tube. If so, you may need to adjust a little bit and remove any lawn debris that may build up around cages or tubes. So some long-term maintenance tips. You want to remove that wildlife protection at some point. Some of them are designed to break away from the tree, but that doesn't always happen. So wildlife protection should be removed when the base of the tree reaches 3 to 3.5 inches in diameter, or when the shelter starts to split. The split will start at the base of the tree. So you want to watch at the bottom. Not removing your tree tube or wraps can damage the bark, and eventually it'll girdle and may kill the tree. Pruning is the most common tree maintenance procedure long term. Although forest trees grow quite well with only nature's pruning, landscape trees require a higher level of care to maintain their structural integrity and appearance. Although improper pruning can cause lasting damage or shorten a tree's life. That being said, the subject of pruning could be its own webinar, so I'll just be talking the very basics of pruning. When should you prune? Anytime in the late fall or early spring is typically best for trimming trees and pruning. In the fall and winter, trees enter a dormant stage, halting their growth. This inactivity, along with dropping temperatures, creates an ideal setting for pruning. If you prune after new growth has started, you can limit the plant's bloom potential for the year. Why do we prune trees? Common reasons for pruning are typically to remove dead branches, improve form, and reduce risk associated with breakage. Trees may also be pruned to increase light and air penetration within the tree itself or to landscaping below. In most cases, mature trees are pruned as corrective measures related to safety, clearance, and compatibility with other components of the landscape. So pruning cuts should be made just outside the branch collar. Similar to the root collar, this is where the branch meets the trunk of the tree or a larger branch. The branch collar is the swelled up area under the branch that connects the branch and the tree. It's easy to spot on some trees, like this one pictured. It can be more difficult on other trees. So this branch collar contains the parent material from the trunk and should not be damaged or removed. So when you prune a tree, you also want to try to make that cut in one single cut. For larger limbs, you want to cut from the underside of the limb to avoid tearing the bark. So what should you remove? Remove diseased, broken, or dead branches. Remove any downward growing branches. If two limbs are crossed, entangled, or otherwise competing, you'll want to remove one of them completely at its base. Any suckers coming up from the roots or that are low down on the trunk below the main spread of the canopy. And remove vigorous vertical branches called water spouts, which you can see in the picture right there. How much should you prune? The amount of live tissue that should be removed depends on the tree's size, species, and age, as well as what you're looking to do with the tree. Younger trees can tolerate the removal of a higher percentage of living tissues better than the mature trees do. So generally, no more than 25% of the crown should be removed at once, and this should be less for mature trees. A word of caution when attempting to prune larger trees or trim larger trees. Heavy branches and tall trees, you should probably consult a professional arborist. Hiking up a ladder with pruning tools in hand can be dangerous. So yeah, you might want to consult a professional if you're looking at doing a larger tree. Here's some additional online resources about selection and placement and planting of trees. Number one is I would ask at your local nursery. If you have questions about a specific situation, I'd encourage you to ask someone at your local nursery. They should be able to point you in the right direction about what species or products or tools that you may need. I've listed a couple other websites here that can offer more information on planting and tree care. There are numerous others as well. I like the USDA plants database. It's a great resource to identify the type of environment a tree would do best. So if you're looking at those conditions like how big is the tree going to be at maturity, or what soil, or how much light it likes, or how much water it needs, those things can be found there. You just search what your species is. As I mentioned before, Penn State Extension has additional resources on their website. They can provide soil testing, so you know what types of soils you have and what would grow best. And of course, we at ACCD are also here to help. So with that, my contact information is listed there if you have questions for me later. Thank you all for listening and participating. Thanks to John for co-hosting, assisting with questions. And with that, I'll take any questions that you may have had throughout the presentation.
Thanks, Amy. There was the initial question that we received was, are we going to make this presentation available online? And will we be following up with participants with links to the resources that we've shared?
Yes, so you will receive a follow-up email with the links that we've listed. We've also recorded the webinar. In addition, in that email, you'll also receive a survey about the webinar. We'd really appreciate it if you take a few minutes to share your thoughts about this webinar, as well as any future topics that you might want to hear about. So please fill out your survey. As for posting it, I will probably post the recording on our website, I would assume.
Yep, that sounds good. We certainly will. Once we get the exact location, we'll be sure to let everyone know.
Mhm.
Our next question to you was, what is your favorite tree?
My favorite tree, I really like eastern hemlocks. It's our state tree, and I just think they are really pretty. I'm originally from Clarion County, so um, Cook Forest, the cathedral up there, has some great old growth specimens of eastern hemlocks.
Our next question is, someone has a property that they only visit occasionally. Are there trees that are particularly good to just kind of plant and walk away from? Low management, less watering needs, less pruning?
Um, yeah, I'd say if you have an area that's wetter, sycamores do fairly well with limited care. I would think your maples and oaks, I would only caution against like deer browse if you're going to leave it unprotected, um, which you might want to if you're not going to get up there very frequently to do any kind of maintenance. I'd also encourage you to ask at your nursery of what supplies that they have, what species they have that could meet that need as well.
Okay, the next question is, you had mentioned sycamores. Are there any other trees that do particularly well in wetter soils?
Um, yeah, so we plant a lot of riparian buffers at the district. So we plant a lot of those kind of wet loving trees. Um, Things like swamp white oak, um, any kind of willow typically does well in wetter areas. Um, some of your like silky dogwood um, does pretty well in wet areas.
Thanks. And I believe our last question was asking if we can share any resources or tips on transplanting a young tree.
Transplanting a young tree. Yeah, I think some of those online resources we'll probably talk about some of those, but we can also follow up with some additional resources as well in the follow-up email that you'll get.
I think that takes care of our questions.
Awesome. So with that, I'll remind you just to look for that follow-up email with those additional resources and to please fill out your survey and enjoy the sunshine that's out there and the rest of your Earth Day.